Feeling the pinch every time you check out at the grocery store? You're not alone. Over the past 4 years, we've seen an eye-watering 25% increase in food prices, hitting record highs. In fact, the Consumer Price Index alone rose a record 8.6% in the last 12 months, the largest increase in over 40 years. This rapid rise in inflation is crushing the dreams of the average American and leading to far-reaching effects such as crisis fatigue. Today, we'll be unpacking why your grocery bill is through the roof and why inflation is here to stay. While many major media outlets like to say that this is going to change, the reality is far from the truth. They're just sugarcoating the facts so you can keep your hopes up. The chances of deflation right now are next to none, and there are several reasons as to why, which we'll dive into. We'll also talk about what history has taught us about overcoming inflation and whether there is a way to overcome it now without major repercussions. Are we doomed for another major recession, or is this just a small blip on the road to further economic growth? For starters, it's crucial to recognize that inflation isn't just about luxury goods skyrocketing out of reach. No, it's hitting where it hurts most. Everyday necessities. The price of groceries, fuel, and basic services is soaring, squeezing budgets and forcing hard choices. Your grocery bill today is buying you far less than it did just a year ago. That's inflation for you. And in this economy, your money is losing value faster than ever. Savings, for many, that's turning into a distant dream. Nearly half, or 49% of adults, have less savings or no savings compared to a year ago. Each paycheck is shrinking in its buying power, and for most folks, pay raises are barely making a dent in keeping up with these rising costs. As a result, more Americans are being compelled to work longer hours, often for the same or even less in real terms, just to keep their head above water. In fact, nearly 70% of Americans are looking for extra work to fight inflation. Businesses, especially the big players, aren't immune either. But here's the catch: they have a buffer that we don't. They can and do pass on the costs to consumers. How? Through higher prices, reduced product quantities, shrinkflation, and cutting corners on benefits and perks. The unfortunate result is that the burden of inflation falls squarely on you, the consumer. So in an environment where prices are continuously rising, holding on to money can feel like a losing game. It's like being in a boat with a slow leak. The boat is gradually but surely sinking. This situation nudges people towards immediate spending as the incentive to save diminishes. And why would you save if you know the power of your savings is going to be cut by a quarter in just 4 years? Plus, when prices go up, they rarely come down to their original levels. This is further fueling the people to spend now rather than later. A large part of this phenomenon can be attributed to what many call greedflation. 80% of shoppers believe that food companies are using inflation as an excuse to hike prices. And while CEOs of grocery chains like to say these people are just hallucinating, the reality is that corporate profits have hit their highest level ever in 70 years. It's not hard to tell a full-blown lie, especially since these companies have to report their earnings, but hey, CEOs can say whatever they want these days and still rake in millions. This vicious cycle helps the big producers, those with higher profit margins, to not only survive but thrive, benefiting from economies of scale. Meanwhile, smaller producers, the ones with thinner margins, struggle to keep up and end up going out of business, only to be swallowed by these larger competitors. It's a lose-lose situation for the consumers. But to fully understand the recent surge in U.S. inflation, we need to look at the combination of long-term economic strategies and more immediate factors that caused it. First off, for nearly 2 decades, the U.S. maintained near zero interest rates, a policy aimed at encouraging borrowing and investing to stimulate the economy. This low-interest environment pushed savers to seek higher returns through riskier investments, contributing to asset inflation. While this hurts the average consumer, this kind of inflation typically doesn't directly impact everyday necessities like groceries, but it does impact the cost of homes, which from the beginning of 2020 to now have risen a staggering 27.5%. A similar situation can be said for renting, as in the last decade alone, rent inflation outpaced currency inflation by 40.7%. This leaves the average American without a home and struggling to pay rent. So much so that even Zillow announced a significant addition to its rental offerings: the option to search for and list individual rooms for rent. Another significant factor has been the impact of prolonged war and military engagements. Historically, wars can stimulate economies, but endless wars disrupt global supply chains and can lead to persistent economic imbalances. Take, for example, the recent Red Sea shipping crisis. Ever since the attacks occurred on the cargo ships passing through the Suez Canal, a substantial number of vessels have avoided the Red Sea area, causing a ripple effect on global trade and the economy. The Suez Canal is vital for around 30% of the world's container traffic. It serves as the shortest maritime route between Asia and Europe, with about 15% of global maritime trade volume normally passing through. Higher transportation costs lead to increased prices for imported goods, which in turn contributes to overall inflation. This factor, coupled with decades of deficit spending where the US pumped a massive amount of money into its economy, has led to hyperinflation. The only thing that has saved the US from a complete economic spiral is the fact that the US dollar is the reserve currency internationally. This allowed it to export some of this inflation globally. This is largely because the rest of the world was willing to refill our credit card, aka buy our government debt. But this could only go on for so long before it collapsed. The onset of the pandemic marked the turning point of this deficit spending. We were already overdue for a reckoning, but the pandemic put it in overdrive. The government's response, including the distribution of stimulus checks and unemployment benefits, effectively provided a temporary universal basic income, incentivizing some to stay home. In total, it injected approximately $5 trillion into the economy. However, these policies were like double-edged swords. They provided short-term relief, but contributed to long-term economic challenges, including inflation and a shift in work attitudes and consumer spending habits. This tightened the labor markets and put upward pressure on wages and prices. Then, business closures rippled through the economy, disproportionately impacting smaller businesses. Large corporations like Walmart remained operational, classified as essential, while many small family-owned businesses, restaurants, and salons were forced to shut down. This disparity further widened the economic gap between the big and the small, as the pandemic-era policies favored larger businesses. Additionally, the pandemic disrupted supply chains significantly, particularly in 2021 and 2022. One example was in the auto industry, where production dropped due to shortages of computer chips and other inputs. The shortages were so large that even used cars increased in value, and people could make a profit buying and selling them due to these shortages. So, with the hopes of a recovery being nowhere in sight, is there a way to fix the US inflation crisis long term? To understand, we need to look back on what history tells us. And if history tells us anything, taming inflation is like trying to tame a wild beast. It often requires extreme measures and can lead to drastic consequences. Let's rewind to Germany post-World War I. Following World War, Germany was burdened with heavy war reparations as dictated by the Treaty of Versailles. The reparations were extremely demanding and strained the German economy. To meet these reparations and to fund the government, Germany started printing more money. This increase in the money supply, without the backing of gold or economic growth, led to hyperinflation. As more money flooded the market, the German mark rapidly lost its value. The hyperinflation wiped out the savings of the middle class, leading to widespread poverty and despair. The economic turmoil and social unrest contributed to the rise of extremist political parties, including the Nazi Party. The Nazis capitalized on the public's discontent, blaming the economic woes on various scapegoats and promising a return to prosperity and national pride. The economic instability and the rise of the Nazis eventually led to the militarization of Germany and the onset of World War II. But let's not forget our own backyard. In the 1970s, the US was going through stagflation, a combination of stagnant economic growth, high unemployment, and high inflation. To curb inflation, which reached a high of 13.5%, Federal Reserve Chairman Paul Volcker cranked up interest rates. How much? Up to 20%. Our interest rates are only at 5.5 right now. Just picture what would happen if we would reach for 20%. Volcker's policies successfully brought down inflation, which fell from a high of 13.5 in 1981 to 3.2% by 1983. But they also created recession, leading to soaring unemployment, a blow to the manufacturing sector, and a whole decade of grappling with economic strain. Unemployment peaked at 10.8% in December 1982, the highest rate since the Great Depression at that time. Despite the short-term pain, Volcker's actions are credited with laying the foundation for a long period of economic stability and growth that followed. But times have changed. The global economy is more interconnected now, making unilateral actions like those for the 70s and 80s more complicated and potentially harmful on a worldwide scale. Today, it's even hard to fathom our current politicians or government taking such drastic steps. So we are stuck with the game of small monetary adjustments and fiscal restraints. While the news often highlights the declining inflation rate, it's essential to understand what this really means. The current annual inflation for the 12 months ending January 2024 is 3.09%, down from the peak of 9.06% in June 2022. But a lower inflation rate doesn't necessarily mean prices are dropping, it simply indicates that prices aren't increasing as rapidly as before. This subtlety in inflation dynamics is crucial because if this doesn't necessarily translate to immediate relief for consumers as day-to-day prices continue to rise, but the effects of inflation extend beyond mere numbers. They significantly influence consumer behavior and overall quality of life. Most U.S. incomes haven't kept up with inflation, placing a considerable strain on household finances. Many have seen their savings diminish and their debts increase as people resort to using credit cards and loans to manage daily expenses. This financial stress is evident in the choices consumers are forced to make, such as between essential goods like food and other critical needs like medicine. Furthermore, inflation affects long-term financial planning. People planning for retirement or other long-term goals face enormous challenges. The cost of living will increase over time, impacting the purchasing power of savings and investments. So while the news of decreasing inflation rates brings a sense of relief, our problems are systemic. Only changing large parts of the system will curb higher prices for things you need, but not for the things you want. The nicer things in life will get further and further away from the middle class, leading to further division as a society. Just like post-World War I in Germany, this scenario may lead to further propagation of extremist parties and viewpoints, something that we are already seeing take place today. Alright Midwits, we just surfed the wild waves of US inflation. Remember, whether you're a Wall Street wizard or someone who still thinks the bear market means a great place to shop for teddy bears, staying informed is key. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button. It's the one investment today that's guaranteed not to be affected by inflation. After all, understanding money shouldn't make you feel like you're trying to solve a Rubik's Cube blindfolded. Until next time, keep your wallets wise and your spirits high.